Well, I'm now joined in the studio by Hassan Ahmadian. He's an associate professor at the University of Tehran. Good to have you with me here in the studio. So, Professor, first of all, let's take apart some of these lines that have been dropping fast and furious in the last couple of hours. Donald Trump saying Iran has agreed to suspend its nuclear program indefinitely. How likely is it that Iran has agreed, in your understanding, to suspend its entire nuclear program indefinitely?
There's nothing that has been agreed so far on the nuclear program.
But why then would the US president make this kind of statement if Iran is Iran going to come out and say we haven't done this?
I think the negotiations that are to basically restart with the mediation of Pakistan are about this. So there's no negotiations now that he basically forced the ceasefire, which was supposed to happen in, parallel to Iran's ceasefire. It was a regional ceasefire agreement with the unfreezing of Iranian assets for Iran to
That's
return.
what the mediator of Pakistan said,
yes.
in their understanding.
Iran and Pakistan said so, but Israel violated it, and so Iran said that wartime situation in the Hormuz will continue. Now, with the ceasefire in Lebanon, talks of unfreezing Iran's assets, the Strait of Hormuz being dealt with differently by Iran. Not that different,
We'll
but
talk
still.
in a minute about the Strait of Hormuz, but I want to finish first these lines about what Donald Trump is saying has been agreed. And he's saying, we will go in at a leisurely pace to recover uranium, which we think refers to the 60% plus enriched uranium. Again, how likely, from your understanding, is it that Iran will agree to allow US, I guess, forces to go in and recover enriched uranium to that degree?
Yeah, I wanted to get to this point. So far, nuclear is subject to discussion. There's no agreement on anything on the nuclear file.
Right.
There are ideas mediated by Pakistan back and forth between Iran and the United States, but there's no agreement. I can say that with certainty. But Iran basically has a red line on its nuclear program. You can't just ask it to indefinitely freeze its enrichment because that's a right. It has, in accordance with the international law, with the treaty, the
NPT.
The NPT, basically. And so it's not willing to give it up. And I think him talking about Iran giving up its uranium is also unrealistic. The Iranians came up with ideas before the war, and I think they are sticking with those ideas.
That's what I was going to say. It was reported before the war through the Omani mediators that there had been a breakthrough in handing over the plus 60% enriched uranium.
It's not handing over. It's bringing it down, diluting it to 20% and then to 3.67%, which is for peaceful purposes only, according to the IAEA. And so
you don't think it's realistic that they will now agree to the US going in there and taking that enriched?
There's a threshold to getting into an agreement on this.
Okay.
For two reasons. The Iranians are saying this is our right, and second, they are not that they don't have that much of stockpile to give this up, and then when the United States violates its commitments, then to enrich again. They don't have much uranium, so it's not that easy.
Let's talk about the Straits of Hormuz, and the US president also saying Iran has agreed to never close the Straits of Hormuz again. Again, how likely is that, do you think?
Well, that's, I think, depends on how the United States acts. Basically, when there was agreement, as I said, they violated it in two basic, points. Lebanon, and then the unfreezing of assets. Iran also said we are not bound to it. Now, if the United States is to violate its commitments, I can see that the Iranians will also go back to where they were.
Well, he's already saying that Iran will not receive any frozen funds from the US. So is it likely that the Iranians will take that step without any promise of unfreezing their assets?
I can't imagine a scenario in which the Iranians would have done so without, receiving promises from the mediators that this will happen. Because that was a package offered to Iran, and Iran accepted it. And based on it, started dealing with the United States indirectly through Pakistan and went to the negotiations. Now that Iran is announcing that the situation in the Strait is changing, I can imagine that there is an agreement on this.
So I'm listening to everything you're saying, Professor, and this is what I'm wondering now. It basically sounds like you're saying pretty much everything that the US president has announced is not accurate, is not correct. Why are we not hearing anything from the Iranian side? Doesn't that silence tell us something?
Well, the silence is basically not that weird when it comes to Tehran, because they're not within the mood of President Trump, who just basically comes out and gives different announcements. I suspect that the Iranians will come out with their narrative. There have been some points, being raised by people in Tehran, but it's the official line. It's Friday today, so you will hear more.
This new maritime, shall we call it, arrangement, is Iran going to be able to enforce that long term without the objections of other states? Because it pushes the maritime traffic into Iranian territorial waters. Does that not violate the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, Articles 37 to 39, that talk about the right of unimpeded passage for ships?
Yeah, sure. You see, if you put it in that light, of course. But the reality is that the deepest route goes through Iran's territorial water. So Iran is not changing the route for that purpose. It doesn't need to.
But before February 28th, the ships were not restricted to only that passage.
No, I know, but
there is a change, right?
But the ships that are heavy or heavier, they usually go through Iran's territorial water because it's deeper. So they don't need to change anything. They can just, in accordance with international law, observe what's going in and out. And they have said, with the announcement by Mr. Araghchi, they have said that it's the Supreme National Security Council's announcement that is to be observed. Firstly, that passage is only for innocent passage for ships that are commercial or energy related, not military. And secondly, they should be observed by Iran's Navy. So it's basically that same announcement that was announced before.
Well, I have so many more questions, but I'm already being told that the time is up. I apologize. We're going to have to leave it there. Professor Hassan Ahmadian, professor from the University of Tehran, thank you so much for coming in.